I think you're all set.
Amazing. Looking good. Thank you, Ken. Yeah, I guess I'll start. I'm Jacob Banting. I'm the program coordinator for Clean Marine BC with Georgia Strait Alliance.
And hello, everybody. My name is Jess Newley. I'm the Community Science and Education Director at Friends of the San Juans, located here in the San Juan Islands, just south of the Canadian border, here in the center of the Salish Sea. And the Friends of the San Juans mission is to bring people and nature together to protect the San Juan Islands and the Salish Sea. So I'm super excited about this presentation tonight and this collaboration with Georgia Strait Alliance because I think it's a perfect thing for a kind of cross-border collaboration to talk about the parts that we as voters play in this important protection work. And before we get started, just a couple of the housekeeping things, which you all are already doing so wonderfully. If you have noise in your background, please remember to turn off those mics. You're welcome to keep your camera on so we can see those beautiful faces, but that's also up to you. And I are going to be going over a lot of great information and sharing a lot of resources. Some throughout the presentation, Ken, our helpful tech guy. Thanks, Ken. Shout out to Ken. We'll be putting some of the links in the chat, but not all of them. At the end, we will put all of the links, and then we'll also be sending out a follow-up email. And so as we're mentioning things, don't worry about writing things down or clicking on things if you don't want to get distracted, and we'll make sure that we get all of those resources to you. If you have questions as we're talking, please go ahead and put them into the chat as they come up. And then we're going to have a good chunk of time, about 15 minutes or so. Jacob, I feel like I get a Canadian accent when I'm talking around you. I'm going to start saying a boot. um, 15 minutes or so at the end for questions. And so we're looking forward to having a good discussion with you all at the end here. And I think that's all I have. And so we can jump in.
Amazing. Yeah, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm really eager for this, and I've been excited for this for a while, and happy we can have these transboundary calls. Ken, we can go to the next slide and begin. Thought I'd open up a bit on the Salish Sea, home to the many Coast Salish peoples, such as the lands of the Tla'amin First Nation, where I'm calling in from today, in Cathet Regional District on the Upper Sunshine Coast of BC. The Salish Sea is one of the world's largest and most biologically rich inland seas that encompasses the Strait of Georgia, Puget Sound, and the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and with its many inlets, channels, and straits, such as Boundary Pass to bustling bays, and harbors like Bellingham and Victoria, which serve as hubs for marine activity, and the precious estuaries like the Fraser River Estuary that are critical habitats for a diverse range of life where freshwater mixes with saltwater and often called nurseries of the sea. This dynamic and interconnected system, shaped by these diverse features, is a bioregional continuum that connects BC and Washington through shared waters, wildlife, and ecological importance. Here you can see some of the boundaries. So the northern boundary extends to the southern tip of the Discovery Islands near Campbell River in BC. In the south to the end of Puget Sound at the head of Budd Inlet near Olympia in Washington State. And the eastern boundary encompasses the mainland coast of BC and Washington. And the western boundary stretches to the outer coast of Vancouver Island and the Olympic Peninsula. And I'll pass that to you, Jess. The next slide.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacob, for that big picture overview of the Salish Sea. And it's really because of those tribal treaty rights that we all have a shared responsibility to protect this place. But of course, also because we all love this place and we enjoy recreating. It's important for the economy, culturally, so many things. And so really, and boaters play a big part of that. And we have a shared responsibility to make sure that this wondrous place stays around for generations to come. And that's kind of what we'll be diving into tonight is some of those ways that we can help out as boaters to protect this special place. One of the biggest reasons I'd say, in my opinion, that this place is so special is shown in this picture here. And this is, again, in the San Juan Islands, just south of the Canadian border, but it looks very similar to the Gulf Islands, is how much marine shoreline there is. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of marine shoreline. And that really is what that shoreline where the land meets the sea is what supports all of the biodiversity in the Salish Sea and the region. And especially as Jacob mentioned from the Fraser River salmon, a huge estuary and salmon resource in Washington State even and in the San Juan Islands. We have another graphic, but I think I don't have the exact number, but so many baby Chinook salmon are coming from the Fraser River to the shorelines of the San Juan Islands for rearing habitat, where they grow big and strong before they head out to the Salish Sea. And that's the most important part of a salmon's life cycle. And so really just highlighting that importance of that nearshore habitat, the shoreline that we live amongst. And kind of that where the land meets the sea and also where human activities and boating activities also take place. Next slide, please, Ken. And people come from all over the world to come to the Gulf Islands and the San Juan Islands, and the Salish Sea is one of the top boating destinations in the world. And I think that we all have a pretty good reason why that is. From our beautiful anchorages and the wild nature, we all get to experience all the wildlife at the surface that we can interact with, or not hopefully interact, but respect from faraway distances, like the humpback whales, the growling sea lions and their colonies amongst the rocks, of course, our beloved killer whales. But it's really all of the habitat that's under the surface that is not as easily seen or experienced that is supporting all of this life that we get to see at the surface. Next slide, Ken. And some of that habitat is we're going to talk more about tonight, but is like the bull kelp forest as seen in this picture that I took off the west side of San Juan Island. So just lurking just under the surface is a magical forest under the sea, one of my favorite places to spend time. But so important. These forests and bull kelp forest and the eelgrass meadows play a very critical role. They host all the little silverfish or forage fish that salmon depend on. And of course, our killer whales depend on the salmon. So it's all very connected out there. And it's really because of this habitat, again, just under the surface that we get to have so much wild biodiversity in this region. So tonight, just to give you a little overview of what we're going to go through, we're going to start with the killer whales, one of our favorite topics and everyone's favorite topic, some of the new boating regulations and current regulations in Washington and BC. And then we're going to take a deeper dive into the eelgrass habitat and how boaters can help protect that and the current kind of research and measures in BC and in Washington. And then we're going to end the evening tonight with some ways that we can help keep the water clean through oil spill prevention and pumping out and some other resources. And like I mentioned, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion. All right, next slide, please. All right, so this is very important before we get into the different regulations, and it's probably a lot of boaters' number one question because we know that we have different regulations for different whales. And we have two different ecotypes of killer whales in the inland Salish Sea. Technically three, we have offshore killer whales too, but they don't come inland. So I'm just going to focus on these two types. We have the transient or the big killer whales as seen in the top picture. And then we have the southern resident killer whales in the bottom picture. Transients, of course, they are the marine mammal eaters, and residents are the salmon eaters. The name doesn't really correlate to like how long they spend in the inland Salish Sea. As we all know, our resident killer whales are not so resident anymore. They are not as commonly seen or found around here. And that's really because both of these whales are following their food sources. And as we all know, there's the Chinook salmon and other salmon are endangered. And so the southern residents are seen less and less here. And the transients who eat the marine mammals, their food is plentiful. And so they are around more and more common than the southern residents. So the number one thing that scientists use to tell the difference between these two whales, and I don't know if y'all can see my pointer, but just behind the dorsal fin on their back is a thing called a saddle patch. And so it's not super easy to see in this graphic, but on the top one, thanks, Ken. There you go. On the top one, there's the saddle patch where that blue dot is over. That's an enclosed saddle patch. So it's kind of all shaded in. So we say the transients or the big killer whales have a closed saddle patch. And on the bottom picture, the southern residents, the salmon eaters, they have an open saddle patch. This is actually a unique identifier to each of the whales, so it's like a fingerprint. And so that's how scientists also can identify individual whales and how they get their names and how we keep track of them. But of course, and so they all have different shapes and sizes and too, again, unique identifiers. You have to have a pretty keen eye to be able to even see the saddle patch. And really good binoculars. And so this is really tough way to identify them if you're out on your boat. I would say, and then there's other little things like the way the eye patches, the white on the front of them are shaped, their body kind of physiology, the transients who are the marine mammal eaters, they're a little more bulky. Of course, their food source is bigger. And so some people call the southern residents a little more dainty. When I'm out in the water and I see killer whales, my biggest clue is how they're behaving socially. So because southern residents, they're eating fish, they don't have to be sneaky. So they're often the ones that are more like playful at the surface. They're more vocal. They are jumping out of the water, breaching, and doing all these socializing and communicating with each other because, again, they don't have to be as like, sneaky hunters. Transients, on the other hand, every time that I've been around them, they're way more common to be stealthy. So because what they eat, marine mammals, sea lions, porpoise, and seals, they have to be very quiet. And so you won't see them breaching as often. Sometimes you will after a meal, they will celebrate, but or when they're teaching their young how to eat, but it's not as common to see them kind of socializing and in really big groups. That's the other biggest thing is if you see a pod of whales like larger than 10, that's most likely going to be your southern residents. We've had J-pod in the inland seas between San Juans and the Fraser River. Just last night, they're up around Pender and up towards the Fraser. They're traveling in a group about 34 whales. And the transients, they break apart from their matriline and they're in groups from average about 4, tops 10 whales. Next slide, Ken. The number one way that you're going to know if it's a southern resident or a transient, I took this picture in Spiden Channel just north of San Juan Island, is if you actually witness what they're eating. So while this picture doesn't show it, these whales were tossing a harbor porpoise in the air. So of course, I'm going to know that's a transient whale if I see a harbor porpoise flying in the air after the whale comes out of the water. So these are the current regulations for boating around killer whales in Washington state. It's 200 yards away from transient killer whales. That rule has not changed. But the newest regulation that came into effect of January of this year is it is now 1,000 yards away from southern resident killer whales. And that is very far away and very hard to tell. They are coming out with some resources like the Orca Rangefinder. But really, pretty much if you see and can tell it's a southern resident, you're too close to the southern resident. So kind of the next regulations I'm going to mention are the best things to go by. The number one thing, and Jacob's going to talk more about that, is if you see a blow, go slow. So be very vigilant when you're out on the water. We share this habitat with these whales, and they were here first, and so we have to respect their home, their habitat, and every time we're out in the water, just be really cautious and careful, and slow down if you do see any activity. The regulation, Be Whale Wise regulation, is to go under 7 knots within a half mile, which all you sailboaters out there probably don't have to worry so much about that, but powerboats do. A big thing that people don't think about, which is really important, is that if it's safe to do so, turn off all your depth finders and definitely your fish finders. So all of these tools that we have on board, they emit sound underwater and can interfere with echolocation. So that helps out a lot. And then, of course, the whales don't know the regulations, and this happens a lot, that the whales can pop up near your boat or within those distances and just turn off your engine when they appear within the 400 or 200 yards. And then if it's safe to do so, and then wait for them to pass by, and then you can go on your way afterwards. Next slide. And as I said, this is kind of the big news in Washington State, this new 1,000-yard distance from the southern resident killer whales. So you will start seeing this graphic from the Be Whale Wise. The Canadian regulations are on there too in the yellow band. And of course, there's different metrics for each side of the border. There's different numbers. I wish I could say it's all the same and very easy and nothing changes when you cross the border, but it's definitely not that way. So it's something that we just need to make sure that we pay attention to, that we know the regulations where we are boating, and practice doing this. All right, now Jacob is going to talk about the BC regulations. Next slide.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. Yeah, for BC, it's 400 meters away from all orcas in southern BC coastal waters, between Campbell River and just north of Ucluelet. 200 meters away from all orcas in Canadian Pacific water, other than those described above, and 200 meters away from all whales, porpoise, dolphins when at rest or with calf, and 100 meters for all whale and porpoise and dolphins. And I've included the DFO incident reporting hotline here. And if you're out of cell range, you can contact Coast Guard on channel 16. Next slide.
Awesome. And I actually attended a presentation through Washington State or Western Washington University earlier today, and Oceanwise presented, and they had this great graphic that really highlighted what Jacob and I were talking about tonight. So they emailed us to use. So thank you, Oceanwise, for this amazing graphic. But this clearly shows the different regulations on both sides of the border for vessel approaches for cetaceans in the Salish Sea. So go ahead and you can take a picture of this if you want, or screenshot. But I thought this really laid out nicely those different distances. And again, and Jacob, you might know about this more about if Canadian. I know there is people are working on it to get things more aligned across the border and to make it easier for everybody.
Yeah, that's something definitely Georgia Strait Alliance has been working on over the years, and we'll continue to work on that. And there's definitely a lot of confusion when you've got so many different distances for across the border, but also in BC. So that's something I'm trying to collect data on as well to show that there's a lot of confusion on boaters, and yeah, it's hopefully we can get to see that distance increased in BC soon. And we can only do that with support. And as Jess mentioned, for gauging those distances, we do have a good stock of those distance cards. So if anyone would like one of those, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to mail that out, and a guide to green boating or anything else you'd like.
Awesome. Next slide.
This is a map of the 2024 management measures. The management measures come into effect usually at the end of May. here in BC are not updated annually. We can share in the chat the link to our webpage where we keep this updated. But you can see here it's got everything in there from the speed reduction zone implemented last year off of Saturno Island and Tumbo Channel. Vessels should reduce their speed to no more than 10 knots in the area. The interim sanctuary zones are seasonal restrictions in the Gulf Islands, Swiftsure Bank, and the Juan de Fuca Strait to limit vessel traffic, and area-based fishing closures as well. All of these maps we try to keep updated on our pages, but can also be found through the DFO pages. Next slide, please. As Jess mentioned before, the See a Blow, Go Slow campaign. Always be on the lookout for blows or other indicators that a whale presence are present, such as congregating birds, as whales may be feeding in the area and can resurface suddenly. So it's a good sign to slow down. Watch for vessels flying the whale warning flag, which signals that whales are near, and increase your vigilance for whales in areas of known whale density. You can see the photo there of the whale warning flag. Keeping your distance from whales is vital in preventing physical disturbance and noise, which can affect migratory patterns and communication between whales, on top of your own safety. So it's very important to keep that distance. The whale warning flag, yeah, lets you know that whales are in the area. Slow down, be prepared to adjust your course, and you're helping to alert fellow boaters with the goal of prompting them to slow down and follow Be Whale Wise guidelines. The flag promotes a consistent and unified message throughout the Pacific Northwest and coastal waters to promote good boating practices around whales. So as I said, every vessel operator should know the flag, know how to use it, and the importance of having it on board. You can see at the bottom left here, if you have a flag, kind of as Jess was mentioning before, slowing down to 7 knots or less, flying it within 0.65 miles or 1 kilometer, follow regulations to be whale wise, and as discussed, turn off fish finders and depth sounders. And then also if you see a flag, knowing that whales are in the facility, and then definitely observe the direction and travel away from the whales. And you can purchase a flag in Canada through the Marine Education and Research Society, or in Washington at San Juan County or the Whale Museum. And all of these resources can be found on the Be Whale Wise page.
And thanks to some Washington legislation, I think in Washington, the whale warning flags are free. Sorry, BC.
I think up here it's a lot to do with shipping costs too. Yeah, and definitely the See a Blow Go Slow campaign through MERS is incredible.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Whale entanglement. If you ever do see a whale that is caught up in fishing gear, do not attempt to disentangle the whale yourself. Report any live, injured, or distressed or dead whales immediately, and stay with the animal if it's possible. Maintain a safe distance and take any photos you can as you report it. And in BC, you can call DFO's entanglement hotline, which is provided here, or call Coast Guard on channel 16. And if you don't have a radio, just dialing 16 on your cell, star 16. And then in Washington, the entanglement reporting hotline is 1877 or 877 SOS whale, and channel 16 as well. Next slide. Very happy we got to share this on here. The Marine Education Research Society has been working quite hard on this course, and should launch in the next few months. So the QR code here is for the sign up for this free short interactive online course for whale safe boating. Very eager to take the course myself, and you can learn more at the seeablowgoslow.org page. Next slide.
Oh, right. So, yeah, that kind of wraps up a lot of the things on the surface and the important whale stuff and things that we can do as boaters. And I think both of our websites have a lot of those reporting hotlines, and that's a big thing that we can do. Kind of boaters are the eyes out on the water, and so there's tons of those hotline numbers. And it's almost like you're in an airport. You see something, say something. There are people on the other side of those numbers, and so you can call it in. and then go about your day, enjoy your boating, and know that you helped. That's huge. So now we're going to focus a little bit more under the surface and do a little deep dive into some of that habitat. Next slide, please, Ken. And one of my favorite habitats, equal or next to bulk kelp, is eelgrass meadows. And not just because I love diving in them and spending time in them, because they are so beautiful, but also they are very, very critical habitat. And for a lot of reasons, just super important. They're nursery habitat, so they, just like bulk kelp that I mentioned before, they also are a host to so many critters. Baby salmon, if you like to eat Dungeness crab, you should care about eelgrass. And it's all types of flatfish, nudibranch, all kinds of things live and depend on eelgrass, especially our Pacific herring. They rely on eelgrass to spawn and lay their eggs on. Another very important thing for many. Eelgrass is a flowering plant, so it's found in 1 to 30 feet of water. It depends on photosynthesis and synthesis and sunlight to grow. And it also, so it is in that near shore again, and it has many other beneficial factors like preventing shoreline erosion. It's a carbon sequester. I can go on and on and on about all the benefits and cool things that eelgrass does. But saying that, because it is in that near shore, it's also where a lot of popular anchorages are. And so, next slide, please, Ken. Well, this map is really specific to Washington State, and sorry, it's hard to see, but this is the Department of Natural Resource data. You can see all the green dots is where eelgrass is increasing, and red is where it's declining, and it's declining around the Salish Sea. And then my guess would be is this mirrors the eelgrass health assessment in BC waters as well. And it's interesting to see in the San Juan Islands where you think that, we have this big intake of kind of fresh salt water from the strait coming in and strong currents rinsing everything out, that we wouldn't have as much issues, but actually we're losing more eelgrass in a lot of places than in southern Puget Sound, where there's more population and everything else. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Similar to bulk kelp and other habitat, there's just a lot of kind of stacked on pressures on these habitats, and they're on the decline from increasing water temperature. There's eelgrass wasting disease. Friends at San Juans is working right now with University of Washington and DNR to find out where the wasting disease and identify resilient eelgrass beds for protection. Docks. So every time a dock is built over the water, just like I said, eelgrass needs that sunlight to grow, so it shades out the eelgrass and will kill it. Shoreline development, pollution, runoff, all of this, because again, it's in that near shore, near the surface, is greatly affected from that. But there's one thing on this list of these pressures that we can do something about it. We're not going to go out and cool down water temperatures tomorrow. Or fix this disease and different things going on. But there's one thing as boaters we can do, and that is to not anchor. So one of the pressures is boat anchors going into eelgrass. Next slide, Ken. So this little graphic shows what happens. And again, eelgrass growing in 1 to 30 feet of water. If your boat is on the smaller side, that might be kind of the depths that you could be anchoring in. And this is what it looks like under the surface. And you can, yeah, perfect. Thank you. And it's really not just, it's that accumulative impact. So it's not just one or two boats doing, but think about the thousands and thousands of boaters that we have in the Salish Sea each year. It's if every boat is anchoring and pulling up eelgrass, every time the eelgrass is pulled up, it takes years and years to recover, if it recovers at all. And so again, that's something that we can do, is just to be careful and mindful about where we put our anchors, and don't anchor if we don't have to. Friends of the San Juans has been working for a really long time to map eelgrass in the San Juan Islands because, of course, if we're going to ask boaters to not anchor in eelgrass, the question is going to be, well, how do I know where eelgrass is? The overall rule is when in doubt, anchor out. So anchor deeper than 30 feet of water and you know that you're out of eelgrass. Um, and Ken, I think, actually, I could just do this. We have, oh, perfect. Of course, he's already on it. So this map is found on our green boating website, and he just put in the PDF for it. And we also have physical place maps you can email me for, and I can send you one if you want for your boat. We have a bigger size of them. But the really important part of this map is the red zone. So that's where herring spawns. We have very few herring spawn areas left in the San Juan Islands, and it's critical that we protect the herring spawn areas. Um, the dark green is where the shallow eelgrass habitat is. So you're able to anchor deeper than 15 feet of water at low tide to avoid eelgrass. And those are kind of more in the shallow embayments. And then in the lighter green, you have to anchor deeper than 20 feet at low tide to avoid eelgrass. Next slide.
Awesome, yeah. And just to touch on that a bit, definitely anchoring out when you're thinking of that at zero tide. So I'm someone that loves low tide. This week there's nice low tide, so there's actually an eelgrass meadow right in Powell River at Willingdon Beach, and sure enough, there's a vessel not far off the beach at zero tide, and you can see it drifting, same as last year. So knowing the damage it could be causing, but also beach goers as well. Just walking through, swimming through the meadows. I saw an off-leash dog having the time of its life running through. And yeah, so many different disturbances there. And up in BC, we've got right now two voluntary no anchor zones, one on Bowen Island in Mannion Bay, and also Gibson's in the Sunshine Coast near Armours Beach. And hopefully you'll have a few more announced in the coming months. Next slide. This map here is thank you from Pacific Salmon Foundation and Resilient Coast for Salmon for sharing, is for mapping kelp and eelgrass in BC. It's a very cool interactive map that you can surf through. I have fun doing it. It's got a good tutorial on there as well. So it's a resource I would love for everyone to use, and yeah, really encourage folks when you're planning your trips. Just yeah, definitely look into where eelgrass could be. Next slide.
Perfect. So yeah, before you go, as Jacob said, when you're planning, looking at where you're headed, your destination, check to see if there's a dock or a mooring ball you can grab. And if you have to anchor, check out the eelgrass depth map or yeah, the map that Jacob just shared as well. And again, if you know it's a herring spawn area, pay extra attention and don't anchor if you don't have to. And as always, be safe and have fun. Next slide, Ken.
Thank you for, or to Resilient Estuaries of the Salish Sea of Sea Change Society and Resilient Coast for Salmon for this graphic here for safe mooring eelgrass. There's traditional moorings drag and scour the sea floor as tides ebb and flow, and environmentally friendly midline floats that hold the rope above the sea floor are a great alternative to have. And you can see here the mooring buoys can be repurposed and contact Trotec Marine, and I believe they're on Vancouver Island for environmentally friendly moorings. And you can see their contact info there.
And Friends of the San Juans has grant funding too if you're in the islands to replace old mooring buoys to yeah, replace them with the screw anchors, more sustainable, eelgrass friendly ones. Next
All
slide.
right. I've included here, we've got on our webpage our interactive map of pump outs. Another thing I always encourage is folks plan ahead and call the facilities. We update this map annually, but I've noticed there has been a few deactivations of pump outs on the coast here associated with costs. Some folks maybe not trained using pump outs and facilities have just had enough. So I'm getting more and more reports of that every year. So you can see the link here for our maps, and then Washington Sea Grant has the amazing Pump Out Nav app, which I encourage everyone to download. Hopefully, one day we can get our mapping inputted in there and have it be across the border. And next slide, please. Actually, I guess I could, if we could go back to that real quick. Definitely, I've got the rhymes: pump out, don't dump out, and dilution isn't the solution. But it's always good to remember in busy or poorly flushed anchorages, sewage from boats can wreak havoc on the environment. And each year, discharge of sewage results in shellfish closures, increased risks to human health and all marine life. And raw sewage discharge is illegal on both sides of the border. And the Canada Shipping Act prohibits the discharge of raw sewage within 3 nautical miles of shore. So like I'd said, always plan ahead and call, especially when you're in BC. Because yeah, Puget Sound is definitely further ahead. Yeah, what to do in case of spills. Stop the source of the spill, extinguish any igniters, inform staff, and dispose of any materials. Never contain gasoline. It's flammable, and that's important. As I mentioned, the igniters, if anyone's smoking, anything like that, can always be a dangerous situation. And never use soap to disperse fuel spills. It's toxic to marine life and it doesn't eliminate the spill. It's adding another toxin to the water and just separating the molecules, and then they all find their way into the sediment, and it's illegal. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that we encourage folks to always be prepared for any kind of spill. And simple maintenance techniques can help keep your vessel running smoothly in the off season. Absorbent pads, keeping them on your vessel, they attract hydrocarbons and repel water, and are very effective preventative measures in just keeping a bilge stock in your bilge in case you ever do have an accidental leak can be very useful. Tiny amounts of gas, diesel, and oil can kill or harm marine life, and repeated small fuel spills cause irreparable harm to the environment. And chemicals present in the fuel react with sunlight, causing a reaction, creating a byproduct that's significantly more toxic than the original compounds. And yeah, rainbow sheens, even on the surface, can be very difficult to clean up, and absorbents don't actually work to clean up all of that. So the list goes on. So always good to be preventative, use biodegradable oils whenever possible. And next slide, please. Here's the reporting hotline number. The Spills Aren't Slick Network, part of the Pacific States and British Columbia Oil Spill Task Force. Report all spills immediately to 800 Oils 911 or Coast Guard. You can call this number in British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and California. And they will take all the information. So it's good to provide them when, where, how did the spill occur, the amount of pollution and what kind, the name of the person that caused the spill or the vessel. And we always encourage taking responsibility. Every drop has to be reported by law. Yeah, and definitely other things, you can get a fuel saver on your boat. There's always little things you can do to make sure you're never pumping out or any leaks, anything like that coming overboard. When you do call the Spills Aren't Slick number, as I'd mentioned, you're automatically routed to the emergency office in the relevant jurisdiction. And definitely half a liter of oil can cover an acre of surface water. So it's a little goes a long way with oil on the water. Next slide, please.
And hold on, actually, go back one. And Jacob, I'm guessing, I mean, this is what I know from Department of Ecology in Washington. Like you said, right? It's the law, but it's kind of voters automatically assume that you're going to get in trouble if you report, but you're not going to get in trouble, right? Is that the same?
Yeah, the law's more favorable for sure. If you call and report your own spill, I've called for people I know to the hotline, and they just take the information, and what the POSPET team, the Pacific Oil Spill Prevention Education Team, they actually monitor and track the data that is being reported. BC has very low reporting. Puget Sound, they have seen some of the data that they've compiled just to know where the hotspots are, so they can you can target your outreach to those areas. So always encouraging folks to call this number, even after if Coast Guard has come, to still give them a call and report it. I'm putting this in here. Part of my program is our Marina Eco Certification program here in BC. We've got 44 certified facilities and 16 enrolled to be certified. So we always encourage boaters to stop by the certified facilities showing their dedication to follow environmental best practices. And you can find our interactive map on our webpage or the link there. Next slide. I quickly wanted to put in, we've got our Clean Boater survey. You can see there's prizes for an Orca pin and an Orca mug. We use the data each year from our survey in questions ranging from whale regulations to spills, aquatic invasive species. It's only a 5-minute survey, and all of that data I'm able to use as a baseline of boaters' knowledge to target my outreach for the season.
And I see I put a spelling error, but this is supposed to be our take action. So if you are wanting to look for kind of more ways to engage and become part of the community of clean and green boaters with Georgia Strait Alliance and Friends of the San Juans, these are the couple of ways to do that. So just as Jacob said, take the Clean Boater survey. It's very helpful to get that information. And then we just launched at Friends a pledge to become an official green boater. And we'll have that in the chat. But it's basically to do all those things we talked about tonight. Anchor out of eelgrass, be whale wise and give whale space, clean up all oil spills, and pump out, don't dump out. And you get a free tote bag with a bunch of goodies if you come to the San Juan Islands and visit me. Another thing that everyone can do, if you are interested in kind of volunteering when you're out on the water, both Jacob and I, through our organizations, are taking volunteers to do dock talks and to do outreach to boaters. So the next slide will have our email on it. So please reach out to us if there's always more ways to engage, if that's what you're looking for. All right, so now is the fun time for questions. And I think before we take off the share our screen, can you go to the next slide with our information? Very cute picture, Jacob. So here's my email, jess@sanjuans.org, and Jacob's, jacob@georgiastrait.org, along with our boating websites. So again, please feel free to email us. We will be sending up a follow email with all of the resources we shared tonight. Anything else to add, Jacob, before we get into questions?
No, I think that's it for me. If you go to the Clean Marine BC page, you can go into our green boating channels, but also the Marina Eco Certification, pump outs. There's a lot to be found there, but happy to answer any questions anytime.
Yay, it's great to see all y'all faces. We just covered a lot of information.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you talked about don't use soap if you're trying to disperse oil or something, right? But what about gray water that gets dumped that has soap in it? Is that
That's still technically polluting. You're still adding the toxin in.
okay?
Do you report those the
If
same way
it's
you would with a spill?
if it's not oil going into the water, I would just report that whether it's to that's a good question. I can follow up with that because I would imagine that you could report that to up in BC would be RAP, just conservation line, but I wouldn't be too sure down in Washington. But there is lines for just any general pollution reporting.
Hmm.
Probably better to report it even if they don't log it, just in case they do, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And Jacob, that reminds me, Mimi, that's a great question. I know that when I was presenting in Bellingham last time, someone had that question, like, what is the best dish soap to use on the boat? And I forgot to do my research, but I'm going to. Jacob, do you know?
The best dish soap? Any, yeah, eco soap. We are in our guide to green boating, we provide a list of resources to make your own natural alternatives to soap. A lot of times, folks can just use any mixture that's mostly comprised of vinegar and baking soda. Most natural alternatives you can use. I try to use it as much as I can. I'll also share I just have to open it up here real quick, the PDF to our guide to green boating, where you can find a lot of these resources. Just be 1 second
But
here.
there's some boats where the sinks just go right into the water.
Definitely. And yeah, not knowing what they're using. That's the one of the hardest things, even with pumping out, is how do you monitor it? How do you know
Hmm.
what's happening?
Hmm.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'd really like to get maybe a list of the type of soaps, but vinegar and baking soda. I do vessel safety checks, and we look at people's marine sanitation device and make sure that that's secured, right? But I don't think a lot of people know that soap would be damaging.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
You guys had mentioned something about biodegradable oils, and I was assuming that was for your top end and your crankcase on your power boat. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Is there like a particular vendor that you can, where do you find those products?
We've got a list on our webpage of our alternatives with some vendors, but also I can send you the link for it. Resilient Coast for salmon has been actually doing a lot of studies on this and providing more lists for that. I'll
Okay.
put their page in the chat as well right now.
That'd be terrific. Yeah, I'd be interested. Thank you.
Jacob, I want to introduce myself. I'm Darren with On Buoy, and Jess knows me really well. We're trying to be a partner in helping people be green boaters easier by finding a buoy from uh, a local boater or somebody who has shoreline property. I would love to work with you guys up in BC because I have had a few mooring buoy owners that have expressed interest in participating, and I'd love to work with you and be a resource on the voluntary no anchor zones.
Amazing. Yeah, that's incredible. Let's definitely follow up after the call today.
Yeah, I'll shoot you a note.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That does remind me, I think that's something that we didn't mention is there are places that have the voluntary no anchor zones with those buoys that we had pictures of in our slides. Those are buoys are getting harder to put in for various reasons. And so Jacob and I are part of a cross-boundary collaboration group with Northwest Strait Alliance, and we're moving to virtual no anchor zone buoys. And so we're putting them on the navigation apps. And so it'll be really easy for boaters to see that when they're in the area and see where the eelgrass is. So we're very excited for that.
That'll be awesome. I was actually, I did have one question. Is there an updated map for the voluntary no anchor zones? I was looking for one recently and I couldn't find it.
I think it's in the works. The last I heard from the group that it is in the works, but still isn't up yet.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, last I heard, I know in Burrard Inlet there was one proposed for, I think it was Bedwell Bay, but I haven't heard any updates on that as well.
Several questions.
Go for it.
Yeah, George Brooks here in Mount Vernon. You showed earlier if you witnessed a fuel spill, a 1-800 number. Was that number applicable to both BC and here in the US?
Yes, so that's the Pacific States NBC oil spill prevention and education team. So that number you can use in BC, Washington, Oregon, and California, and they'll take the report and direct you to your local dispatch. And I
Yeah,
can share that number in the chat here.
yeah. I asked the question
Oh,
because
perfect. Thanks, Ken.
some years ago in a marina, local marina that I was walking around, I saw a fuel spill. I reported it to Coast Guard station in Bellingham. And from that point on, I probably had at least a dozen phone calls from various agencies, including our emergency management group in Skagit County. And then finally from some very authoritative Coast Guard number that I had violated everything by not going to this Coast Guard special number. And has all that been resolved so the one number will take care of it? And then after I've reported it, I won't be subject to phone calls the rest of the day.
I haven't heard of anyone getting phone calls after. I've used the hotline and not gotten that. So yeah, I believe this would be the better alternative. But
Yeah, it kind of starts at the top and then they will disperse it. Huh, get it?
and I think also, yeah, the accurate reporting, getting everything in there you can. Sometimes it can be hard to know how much got spilt, so just definitely guesstimating if you have to.
You know, probably the people that were most unhappy were the emergency management people from Skagit County, that I didn't call them first. The other question I have, it's been very interesting tonight. I've learned a lot. Now, on your respective websites, will I be able to view the presentation tonight that on your websites?
Yeah, well, we recorded it tonight, and so we have a plan for that, right, Jacob?
Yeah, I was hoping to send it all up in a follow-up email, but I'll definitely be adding it to our webpage in the future.
Okay, but it would be also in the follow-up email.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Thanks, George.
Bill can vote. Yeah. Oh, you're on mute, Bill.
Hi there. I'm in the middle of writing an article for our Canadian boating magazine on entanglement and prevention and cleanup of lines that entangle things. And it ranges all the way from fishing gear used in freshwater areas and up and down rivers. I just put that in the chat. We had a group here that was trying to get this Clear Your Gear site going, but it appears dysfunctional at the moment. And we actually got the idea to look for that in Canada because I'm aware that there is something like that in the United States. A tube at wharfs and docks where you can stuff in your used fishing line and tackle that you no longer use. We don't have that in Canada in most places yet. Started out in Manitoba about 5 years ago, and then I haven't been able to chase them down since. And on the other side of that, we have whale entanglement to worry about, which includes porpoises and dolphins and anything else entangled in larger lines. And I attended a presentation a couple of weeks ago on one of our adventure tour guide companies that works the BC coast during COVID, and for a year or two afterwards. They were given enough money to spend several weeks a year cleaning up beaches of the heavier gear. And I'd just be happy if anybody had any further information that I could use about alerting people to entanglement issues and disposal tricks or facilities that you may know of.
Yeah, for the Clear Your Gear, Bill, I remember we were talking before, this was before my son was born, so last summer. Yeah, Clear Your Gear, I spoke with them and then gave them my follow-up email over. I talked to them over the phone and never heard back. But there is those tubes here. There's one in Powell River and then one on Savory Island. And I know that they installed them themselves. I think the Powell River one got some funding through the district for it, but it's also who's disposing of it when it gets filled up. So I've definitely been have that on my radar. I'll follow up with you, and I'd really like to see those put up at every facility that we could on the coast here. And then for entanglement, yeah, I would think the Marine Education Research Society, as you know, may be definitely a good resource there.
Yeah, these adventure companies, some of them charge an extra fee when you as a guest board with them and they distribute it to companies. And I was told that MERS was their top recipient of the funds that they came up with for that. But we now, because BC government backed away this year, we don't have a large entanglement beach cleanup going on, because it takes a major effort with good size 80-foot ships and up to deal with 61 tons a year that they lift off the beaches. And there was one beach they went back to after 3 years. It was just as full as had they cleaned it up the 3 years previously. So there's a lot of debris out there. So anybody knows anything about that? I don't know how you do in Puget Sound. We up the BC coast, of course, have west-facing shorelines. So we get everything that comes out of the Pacific Gyre and hits our shores. You probably don't see so much in the San Juans and the Puget Sound area.
Yeah, I mean there is not as much. Yeah, I mean there is. And I'm happy to, if you want to email me, or if you have your contact on that website you shared, I can pass forward along some of the Washington resources.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that's a huge issue for sure. All right. Any last burning questions, or should we wrap up this evening? No killer whale questions, huh? I mean, big rule changes, nothing.
Well, now I know how to identify them easier.
Okay, you learned
Although
something.
I'm not, yeah, I'm looking for the fin. I'm not looking for the saddle pads. Thank you both for the great presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Quick question for Jacob. Hi, Jacob. Georgia
Hey,
Strait Alliance.
Chris.
Hi. Hey, when are you coming to Vancouver? I still want to take you for lunch at the club here.
Definitely. I'm going to be in Kits, I think, on the 12th to the 13th of May. But I'll keep you posted. I'll give you a call tomorrow. Maybe we can set up a time, and I'll bring down some signs and some flags and some outreach tools. And we got approval for another summer student this year to distribute boater kits, and they're going to be in the Vancouver Quadra riding again.
Oh, great. That's terrific news. Well done.
I guess I'm not invited to lunch, but just kidding.
I'm going to stop recording now.
Yeah, so long. Thank you.
Cheers, everybody. Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
everyone.
Thank you, folks. Learned a lot.
Great
Very
presentation.
educational.